Hi and welcome to my presentation for today, which is all about how to increase the size of your crochet garment. I'm Lynne Rowe and I am Knit, Crochet, Create, and I'm also known as the Wool Nest. And I'm a knitting and crochet designer and also a technical editor and a book editor and author. So I love to help people to make and create things to wear and to use and to love and to gift. So I'm just really happy today to be here to help you to adjust the size of your crochet garments if the size that you need isn't included in the pattern, or you need to just adjust the measurements of one of the sizes slightly. So I'm going to talk you through 5 different solutions, and they're going to cover different styles of garment, and they range from easy to a little bit more technical. But I'm going to take you through each one step by step so that you have a clear idea of what you would need to do if you wanted to change the size of your crochet garment. And everything that I talk about today is also in the written PDF as well, so you can refer to that later on as and when you're ready. The 5 different options cover things like just simply adding extra rows and rounds to different areas of your garment. They include looking at trying a different size crochet hook and also trying a thicker yarn with a recommended hook size. I look at adding extra stitches and working out how many stitches you need to add so that you know that the finished size is going to be the correct size for you. And also the final option is to add like extra panels in the side seams to give you that extra width. So I'm going to look at each one separately and then we can conclude at the end. Also at the end, I've just included an idea of how to guesstimate the extra requirements that you will have on your yarn, because when you make adjustments to your crochet garment, you will need to factor in the fact that you're going to be making either extra stitches or larger stitches, so that will have an impact on the yarn requirements. Now, with all the solutions that I'm going to chat about, I'm just really covering off the 5 main styles of sweater. We've got a drop shoulder and boxy style sweaters. They are the ones that don't really have very much shaping at all, and they're quite square or rectangular in terms of the pieces that you crochet. We've got the raglan style where you've got the shaping that comes in on the upper body and matches on either side. We've got a set-in sleeve, which is similar to a raglan, but the shaping is just upright. And then we also have a yoke sweater, which is circular around the upper body. So just to keep it as simple as possible, I'm just really covering off those styles of sweater. And the first solution that I'm going to chat about with you is where you just simply want to add some extra length to your sweater, whether it be in the body, in the sleeve, or along the armhole depth. And the easiest way to do this is to decide how much extra length you want to add to your pattern, and then look at the pattern gauge to work out how many rows there are per inch. And then depending on how many inches you want to add, you will work out how many extra rows or rounds you need to add to your garment. And we're probably just looking at maybe an inch or 2 here. But the main question is, where do you then add those extra rows or rounds? And the best place to add them really is at the chest area. So for a bottom-up sweater, once you had created the main body of your garment, you would simply add those extra rows or rounds before any upper body increase begins. You would do the same on the sleeve, and what this would do, it would help you to maintain the width of the arm at that point, so you know it's still going to fit you even though you've added some extra rows or rounds. It's quite simple really to do that. I mean, you know, you just literally adding extra rows and rounds to your pattern. So it's not really technically difficult to do that, but there are a couple of things you need to consider, especially if it's a raglan style or a set-in sleeve style, and you have maybe a pattern to match or some stripes to match. But all you need to do is to make sure that you add exactly the same number of rows to both sections of arm and body. So to the front, to the back and to the arms, add the same number of rows or rounds, so that any stripe pattern matches up, so that you're beginning any shaping at exactly the same point in the pattern, and then everything will match up perfectly. And it's exactly the same if you were working a top-down sweater. You would work all of the upper body shaping first, and then once that's complete and you were ready to work either the main body of your sweater or the shaping of your sleeve to decrease towards the cuff, you would work those extra rows or rounds at the point just after any of this upper body shaping had taken place. So it's exactly the same point in the pattern you would add those extra rows or rounds. Now, if you wanted to add some extra depth here at the upper body, you can actually do that as well. You just need to make sure for those raglan styles and the set-in sleeve styles that you add the same amount of rows for the sleeve and the body as well, so that everything matches. So if you add some, if you're doing the body first, make some notes, and then you can do exactly the same to the same area of the sleeve pattern. And if you were working a yoke and you wanted to add some extra rounds here at the upper body, maybe just to add 1/2 inch or 1 inch onto that area of your pattern. Again, work out how many extra rounds from the gauge swatch that you will need to add, and then space them out evenly along the yoke area. So that's it really for adding that extra length to your garment. The next solution that I'm going to talk about covers two solutions really together, because they're very similar. It's just easy to describe them as one really, but this is where you could increase the overall size of a sweater by either going up a hook size or by using a thicker yarn and the recommended hook size for that thicker yarn. Now, it's really simple to do this as well, because all you're going to do is, instead of using the hook that's recommended in the pattern to achieve the pattern gauge, you're going to go up a hook size. But first of all, you do need to check that by going up a hook size or by using a thicker yarn, that it's going to achieve the size that you require. So first of all, you need to check the pattern's gauge with the recommended hook size in the pattern. So do that first, create your swatch, check that you are achieving the right gauge, change your crochet hook size at that point to achieve the gauge in the pattern. And then once you've achieved the gauge in the pattern, with whatever hook size you needed to do that, go up to the next hook size and repeat the whole gauge swatch. And if you were going to try with a thicker yarn, create the original pattern gauge swatch and then repeat the whole process with thicker yarn and a larger hook size, because what you want to do is to compare the two different sizes of the swatches that you're going to create. So the swatch from the pattern, the swatch with your own adjustments, whether that's a larger hook or thicker yarn. And then what you can do is you can use your new swatch to work out the size that your garment will turn out to be. And the way that you do that is you look at the pattern and you identify the stitch count at the chest point, so at the widest point of the chest, at the same point that we were talking about earlier before any sort of upper body shaping. That's the point of the pattern. You want to see how many stitches are there at that point for the front piece and for the back piece. If it's a circular piece, then they'll all be added together, but if there's a front and a back piece, you've got 2 separate stitch counts. So you've got your stitch count, and then from your gauge you can work out how many stitches you have per inch of your tension gauge. And then you will simply divide your chest stitches by the stitches from your gauge swatch, the stitches per inch. Divide the chest stitches by the stitches per inch, and then that will give you the finished size of that piece. And from that you can work out what the finished size of your adjusted garment would be. And then if you're happy with that, you could go ahead and use that crochet hook or use that thicker yarn. Just follow the pattern as it's written and use your different tools, your different crochet hook or your different yarn. The only thing that you have to do really to bear in mind with this method is that actually by increasing your crochet hook size or increasing your yarn thickness, what you're doing is you're increasing both the width of the stitch but also the height of the stitch, and so ultimately that means that your crocheted garment is not only going to be wider, it's also going to be longer. So what you may need to do, depending on how that's working out for you, is that if you think it's going to be too long, you can just simply reduce the amount of rows or rounds that you make in the body and the sleeve. So it's kind of like what we were doing before. To lengthen the garment, you would take out some rows or rounds to make it a little bit shorter. So then you would have the extra width, but you wouldn't necessarily have that extra depth as well. So it's quite simple really, because all you're doing is you're following the pattern as written. You're not making any adjustments to the pattern itself, but because you're using a different hook size and or a different yarn thickness, that is making the overall size larger. Again, you have to consider how that's going to impact on the yarn requirements, and also how it's going to impact on the pattern itself, because some stitch patterns may not lend themselves very well to a different type of yarn. It's likely that the designer may have tried lots of different types of yarns. We often do that, and some yarns work and some yarns don't. So make sure you do a really nice big tension or gauge swatch of at least 6 inches so that you can test the drape of the fabric that's created. And also, if the stitch pattern is quite open, it may be that by going up a hook size, it kind of ruins the pattern itself, and it may not be appropriate to go up a hook size. So these are the things that you're just going to have to test, and you test that by working up your gauge swatches. So that's how you increase the size of a crochet garment, by increasing your crochet hook size or increasing your yarn thickness. Now, the next option that we're going to talk about, which is the fourth solution, is to add extra stitches. So in this instance, you're going to follow the pattern's gauge. We're not going to change our hook size, we're just going to use the gauge swatch as given in the pattern, and we're going to work out how many extra stitches to add to create the chest measurement that you require. And this is best suited really to a more simple shaped garment, such as like a boxy style or a drop shoulder sweater, because otherwise if you've got extra stitches, you would then have to recalculate and rework all of the upper chest area, so you're practically redesigning the pattern itself. So this is best suited to a simple style of sweater. And what you're going to do is you're going to work out from the gauge how many stitches there are per inch. Then you're going to think about how wide you want your sweater to be in terms of inches. So if you wanted a 60-inch wide sweater, you would then times your 60 inches by the stitches per inch as given in the pattern gauge. So if that was four stitches per inch, and you wanted a garment that measured 60 inches around the chest, you would need 240 stitches. You need to consider whether you have a front and a back piece, then you would divide those stitches by 2, and then you would also need to consider whether there was a stitch pattern repeat on the front and back pieces. Maybe, for example, if there was a 10 stitch pattern repeat and your front piece had 135 stitches, you'd have to then decide whether you needed to adjust the stitches to accommodate that pattern repeat. So you might want to go down to 130 stitches or go up to 140 stitches. You would just need to make that decision, and then you would work those stitches. Like I say, it's best applied to a boxy sweater, so you would just be going all the way up right to the shoulder with the same stitch count, and then you would add on your sleeves after you'd made those. So again, you might want to increase the number of stitches around the width of your sleeves, so you would need to work out what width you require at the widest part of your sleeve, and then make sure that you can work your increases up to that point in accordance to the length that you have. So you're just going to have to spread out your increases along the sleeve to make sure that at the end you end up with a wide enough number of stitches to accommodate the width that you want around the arm. And that's quite easy to do because the style of the sweater lends itself quite nicely to increasing those extra stitches. But like I say, if it's like a raglan or a set-in sleeve, the trouble that you're going to have then is calculating all of this, the decreases along the chest area and any sort of neckline split and things like that. So it's probably best that if you're going to add extra stitches, that this solution is just used when the shaping of the sweater is really nice and simple. So that's how you would add extra stitches. And for the neckline itself, if it's a straight across neck, like a slash neck, you're absolutely fine. You can just finish off your piece according to the pattern. But if there is a split for the neck to create like a rounded neckline, you could follow the pattern stitches that are left for the neckline, and then just incorporate your additional stitches onto each side of the shoulder part of your pattern, so that the neck would pretty much stay the same. You could widen the neck a little bit and add some extra stitches into the sort of centre where you tend to kind of leave a number of stitches. You could add some extra stitches to make the neckline a little bit wider, but you would have to remember that you've got extra stitches to deal with at the shoulder. So it might be that there's a little bit of decreasing up here at the upper neckline, but ultimately you would just have extra stitches on your shoulder area. So that should all work out quite easily, really. And the thing is with crochet, if it doesn't quite work out, if the neckline needs to be a little bit wider for you, or the shoulder seams need to be a little bit wider, you can kind of just unravel it quickly, because you know you're only looking at like a short little bit of crochet. So you can always unravel it and try again. The best thing to do is to make notes, so that if you then use the pattern again, you'll be able to remember all the adjustments that you've made. Always make plenty of notes so that you know how many stitches you left for the centre of the neck, and how many stitches were left at the shoulder area. And then finally, there is one other option that you could do, which sounds quite fun really. It's to add extra panels along the side seams of your sweater. So before you would sew your pieces, the front and back pieces together, you would create some extra panels down the side, and then equally you would create some panels to run underneath the sleeve seam as well, so that the extra panel, you know, ran all the way along. I mean, you could just make one long panel for each side and sew it all along the side seam and then along the sleeve seam, or you could make 4 different panels for each sleeve and each side. You could do them in matching yarn, you could do them in matching stitch patterns, or you could just change it up a little bit and make it a little bit more fun and use a contrasting yarn and maybe a different stitch pattern. But that's a really easy way to add extra width to your garment, and with the kind of handmade trend that's really popular at the moment, it would be a really nice way to make your sweater a little bit more unique. So that is the final option, and that's really quite a quick and simple and fun option to choose. Now, one of the things that I mentioned at the very beginning was to consider your yarn requirements, because when you're increasing your stitches, or you're increasing your hook size or your yarn thickness, or adding panels, ultimately you're going to need more yarn. And so you can use your swatches to work out, for example, where you went up a hook size or where you changed your yarn thickness. You can weigh those revised swatches that you made, weigh your original pattern gauge swatches and work out the percentage difference between those 2 weights of swatch. So weigh a swatch, weigh your larger swatch, work out the difference between the 2 in terms of percent, and then use that difference in percentage to work out how much more yarn you're going to need. So you apply that percentage to the number of yarn balls required. Other than that, you can weigh your swatch, work out how many stitches and how many rows are within that swatch and multiply those. That gives you how many stitches you actually made within that swatch. Weigh the swatch and then divide the weight of the swatch by the number of stitches. That gives you the amount of yarn in grams that it takes per stitch. And then if you know how many extra stitches you're going to make, so you'd have to work that out as well, then you could work out how much yarn you needed. So it is a little bit mathematical, it's a little bit tricky, but it just gives you a little bit of a guesstimate really on how many extra balls or skeins of yarn that you would need for your extra stitches. So I hope that helps. I hope it gives you lots of things to think about when you want to increase the size of your crochet garment. If you've got any questions, you can email me. All my details are in the written document, and I'll do my best to help. And thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your summit.